Colorado Territory, June 1872. The sun was already high above the dusty streets of Trinidad when the gavel slammed down on the auction block, and Florence Langley felt her stomach twist tight. She stood tall, but her hands trembled at her sides. Her 6-year-old daughter, Ella, clung to her skirt, her small fingers wrapped in the fabric like she could anchor herself there forever. "Next up," the auctioneer called, voice thick with sweat and greed. "One young widow, strong, healthy, and hard-working, comes with a fine pair of hands." And he gestured with a crooked smile to the child at her side, a little girl thrown in for good measure. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed. Florence didn't flinch. She had already cried her tears dry last night, curled around Ella in a barn stall after the marshal had taken everything her husband's land, the mule, even the tin plates. A tall man in a sheriff's badge stepped forward. "We do not sell children." "Then she ain't part of the sale," the auctioneer said quickly. "But the buyer can negotiate separate arrangements if he wants to keep them together." Ella's grip on Florence's dress tightened. "Mama," she whispered, "please do not let them take me." Florence dropped to her knees, took Ella's face in both hands and kissed her forehead. "I will not let them," she said, though her voice cracked on the last word. "I swear, baby girl." But she had nothing left to bargain with, no money, no kin, no way out. Then a voice cut through the crowd, low and steady. "I will take her," the man said, "and the child stays with her." Heads turned, Florence looked up. He stood near the back of the crowd, tall and sun-browned, his hat casting a shadow over sharp blue eyes. Dust clung to his boots and the hem of his worn coat. He handed something to the auctioneer, a thick roll of bills, without looking away from Florence. The man stepped forward, his gaze flicking to Ella, then back to Florence. "You will never be separated again," he said. Florence blinked, stunned. "Why would you?" He held out his hand. "Because no one should watch their child get taken from them." The name rolled off the auctioneer's tongue begrudgingly. "Sold to Mr. Rowan Adler." Florence stared up at the stranger Rowan as if he were a dream she had not dared hope for. Then she took his hand. Rowan's grip was warm and firm, and when he helped her to her feet, Ella moved closer to him without hesitation. He did not flinch when she reached out and touched the edge of his coat, like she was testing if he was real. Rowan looked down at her. "You hungry, little one?" Ella nodded. "Then let us get you something to eat." They walked together through the town, past the gawking eyes and whispered judgments. Florence held Ella's hand and tried to find the words. "I do not understand. You do not even know us." "I saw enough," Rowan said simply. "You were standing up there like you were made of iron, but I saw your hands shaking. Folks like that auctioneer do not deserve to break people like you." Florence stared at him. "You paid a lot of money. That was not nothing." Rowan shrugged. "I have more than I need. I run cattle west of here. I do not hire women, but I need someone to cook, help out around the house, maybe teach the little ones in the area. You and your girl would be safe there." "And in return?" she asked, her voice wary. "I do not expect anything," Rowan said. "But if you want honest work and a roof over your head, it is yours." They stopped in front of the small boarding house. Rowan handed Florence a key. "Room 2, you will be safe tonight." Florence hesitated. "Why are you being kind?" Rowan's expression softened. "Because someone should have been kind to my mother when she needed it. No one was." Florence stared into his eyes for a long moment. She saw pain there, old and buried deep, but no deceit. That night, Florence watched Ella sleep curled under the quilt in the boarding house bed. She sat near the window, moonlight on her cheek, thinking about the stranger who had stepped out of nowhere and changed their fate with a single sentence. "You will never be separated again." She repeated his words under her breath. They sounded like a prayer. Rowan returned the next morning with a wagon. Got supplies. If you are ready, we can head out. Florence packed fast. She had nothing but a threadbare satchel, a comb, and Ella's rag doll. Rowan lifted Ella into the wagon first, then offered Florence his hand again. They rode west, the wooden wheels creaking under them. The mountains grew taller in the distance and the land stretched wide and quiet. Ella sat beside Rowan, watching the world roll by. "Do you have any horses?" "10 of them," Rowan said, "and 5 cows. A dog named Scout, too." "Do you have pie?" "Not unless your mama knows how to make one," he teased, glancing briefly at Florence. She smiled for the first time in days. "I can manage a pie," he smiled back. "Then we will get along just fine." That evening they reached Rowan's ranch. It was not large, but it was clean and sturdy. The house was whitewashed and simple, with a porch that caught the last of the day's sun. A barn stood nearby, and a few horses lifted their heads as the wagon rolled in. Rowan helped them down. "This is home if you want it." Florence stood still for a moment, taking it all in. Ella ran ahead, chasing the dog that had come bounding out of the barn. "This feels like too much," Florence said. Rowan looked at her. "No. This is just enough." He showed them the guest room, gave Florence a kitchen full of supplies, and left her to settle in. That night, after Ella had fallen asleep, Florence stepped out onto the porch. Rowan sat on the steps, nursing a cup of coffee. She sat beside him. "Thank you. You do not have to thank me. I do," she said. "You saw me at my lowest. That was not easy. I saw a mother fighting for her child. That is not weakness. That is strength." She looked at him then, really looked. He had a scar across his jaw and lines around his eyes. He looked like someone who had seen more than he wanted to, but his voice was steady and his hands were gentle. "I do not know what we are to you," she said softly. "You are free," he said. "That is all I care about right now." Florence nodded. "Then we will stay. If you will have us." He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "I already do." The first week passed with the slow rhythm of unfamiliar peace. Mornings began with the soft clatter of pans and the low murmur of Ella's voice counting eggs in the basket. Florence had taken to the kitchen, as if reclaiming something of herself, not just cooking, but moving with quiet purpose. Rowan never hovered, but he noticed how she paused over the bread dough, as though remembering something long buried. She worked steadily, without complaint, but her eyes stayed guarded. One afternoon, Rowan returned from the ridge behind the north pasture, dust in his hair and sweat drying on his collar. Florence was outside, hanging damp linens on the line as the wind tugged at her sleeves. Ella sat in the grass with Scout, stringing clover stems together. Rowan approached, holding a leather-bound ledger under one arm. "I've been thinking about the schoolhouse." Florence glanced over her shoulder. "There's no schoolhouse." "Not yet," he said. "But there's a few ranches within riding distance. Families that keep their children working the land because they've got no other choice. If I built one on the edge of the property, would you run it?" She lowered the sheet she was pinning. "You'd trust me with that?" "I've seen the way you talk to Ella. You keep things simple, but she listens. You don't just tell her, she understands." Florence looked away, eyes on the horizon. "My mother taught letters in Kansas before the war. I used to sit in the corner and copy her chalk lines till my fingers cramped." "You ever teach before?" he asked. "Only my own," she said. "But I know how." Rowan nodded. "That's enough for me." She studied him then, as if trying to decide whether to believe that. "You're not looking for a servant, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm looking for someone who's not afraid of hard work, someone who can shape things, not just keep them from falling apart." Florence eased the last sheet over the line. "Then yes. I'll do it." He nodded once, then turned toward the barn without another word. But as he walked away, Florence caught herself watching the way he moved, solid, deliberate, like he was built from the same quiet strength as the land itself. That night after supper, Ella curled up with Scout on the braided rug while Florence and Rowan sat by the stove. The fire crackled low, and the room smelled of apples and wood smoke. Rowan pulled a small carving knife from his coat and began shaving the edge of a block of pine. "I never asked what brought you west." Florence didn't answer right away. She folded her hands in her lap, fingers laced tightly. "My husband was a sharecropper," she said at last. "We left Missouri 2 years ago, thinking land out here meant something different." It didn't. Rowan didn't interrupt. The knife moved in smooth, steady strokes. "He was trying to dig a new well when the rope snapped," she said quietly. "He hit his head on the rock wall going down, died before I could get him out." Rowan set the carving aside. "I buried him under cottonwood," she continued. "After that the bank came, and then the marshal." She looked at him, face unreadable in the flickering light. "I thought I'd seen the worst of it. Then came that platform." Rowan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know," she said, "but I needed to speak it." He nodded once. "You're not the only one who's had to start over." Florence tilted her head. "You lose someone," he hesitated. "I was 16 when my brother didn't come back from the Red River. I waited every day, thinking maybe he was just riding slow. My father stopped waiting first. What happened to him? Drank his way through the winter. By spring, I was running cattle alone." Florence didn't speak, but her eyes softened. She reached over and placed her hand lightly over his. His fingers didn't move, but he didn't pull away. After a long silence, she said, "You carved something." He handed her the pine block. A horse's head, rough but recognizable, was etched into the grain. "I'm no artist," he said. Florence turned it over in her hand. "It's steady. Like you." He looked over at Ella, now asleep with her cheek pressed to Scout's back. "She's different here, brighter." "She hasn't had a fever since we arrived," Florence said. "That's no small thing." Rowan stood and stoked the fire. "You'll have the schoolhouse by end of summer." Florence rose too. "Then I'll have my lessons ready." She started for the small room she and Ella shared, but paused at the doorway. "Rowan," he looked up, "thank you for not asking anything in return." "I don't need to," he said. "You're already giving more than you know." She nodded once and closed the door behind her. That night, Rowan stood on the porch long after the lamps were blown out, the stars sharp above his head. The wind slid across the grass, whispering through the silver sage. He thought of Florence's hand over his, the quiet weight of it, and how it had steadied something in him he hadn't realized was still shifting. Inside, Florence lay beside her daughter, one hand resting lightly over Ella's back. The house was quiet, but beneath the silence a new root had taken hold, small, alive, and growing. By mid-July, the air turned thick with the scent of wet earth and pine resin, the kind of smell that came after a hard rain and lingered in the grass long after the clouds had passed. Florence stood barefoot on the back stoop, brushing out her damp hair as the sun broke through the thinning mist. The hem of her skirt clung to her ankles, and the calluses on her hands had deepened from days spent hauling buckets and splitting kindling when Rowan was out riding the fence line. Inside, Ella sat cross-legged on the floor, copying letters with a charcoal nub Rowan had carved down for her. She hummed to herself, not a tune Florence recognized, but it was light and sure, like the girl had found something steady to stand on. Rowan came in through the barn path, his shirt sleeves rolled and collar open, his gloves tucked into his belt. He carried a brace of squirrels tied by the feet, their fur still slick from the brush. "Caught near the creek," he said, setting them on the chopping block. "Thought you might make stew." Florence nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I can stretch it with barley. There's still some dried sage in the jar." Rowan leaned against the doorframe, watching her pull a pot from the shelf. The schoolhouse walls are framed. Should have a roof by week's end. She added water to the pot, not looking up. You're putting a lot of your time into that. I'm not building it for myself, he said. She stirred slowly, then turned to him. Why are you so sure this'll work? Me teaching again. A child who's never known more than running behind a plow. Because you don't speak like someone who's hoping it's more like you already made up your mind it will. Florence studied the floorboards. I've had to make up my mind about a lot of things. Rowan stepped out again, not pressing her for more. That night, after Ella had gone down with her arms wrapped around a worn quilt, Florence stepped outside with a lantern. She found Rowan sharpening a drawknife on the porch rail, the blade flashing faintly in the lamplight. You don't rest much, she said, setting the lantern between them. Not when there's daylight left in the sky, he replied. She sat down on the top step, tucking her skirt beneath her. You always live alone out here, he didn't answer right away. There was a woman once, long time back. She left before the snow settled. Florence kept her gaze steady. Why? She wanted town life. I didn't. You regret it. Rowan ran the blade along the whetstone again. I regret not knowing what to do with her silence. Florence nodded slowly. I don't speak much when I'm hurting. I noticed. They didn't speak for a long while after that. The crickets filled the quiet, their rhythm slow and even. Florence finally said, I haven't let a man sit close to me in over 2 years. I'm not asking you to, Rowan said gently. I know. That's why I'm telling you. Rowan set the knife aside. You're not something I mean to fix. You're someone I want to understand. She turned her head toward him, eyes flicking over his face. You got any family left? He shook his head. Just the land and the stock. And now, he paused, a child who likes to feed my dog biscuits when she thinks no one's looking. Florence laughed, quick and quiet. She thinks you don't notice. I let her think that, he said, smiling faintly. Florence reached for the lantern handle, her fingers brushing his. She didn't pull away. She asked me this morning if this is where we'll stay, not just for now, for real. What did you tell her? I said I didn't know yet. Rowan's voice was steady. You don't have to decide tonight. I'm not afraid of deciding, Rowan. Then what are you afraid of? She looked out into the dark, the lantern light catching the edge of her profile. That I might want more than just a roof and work. Rowan's hand rested on his knee, open, not reaching. You ever want more you don't have to ask. The words settled between them like a promise, unhurried and unpressed. Inside, the house was still. The stew pot had cooled on the stove and a single candle flickered in the window. Florence stood, took the lantern and paused before walking in. I'd like to sit with you again tomorrow, after supper. Rowan looked up at her. Then I'll be here. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click, and for the first time in years she didn't bolt it. By the 3rd week of August, the cottonwoods along the creek had begun to dull at the edges, the green fading to a tired yellow. The days still burned, but the wind had changed. It carried a dry rasp instead of summer's sweetness, and Rowan knew what it meant. The season was turning. He found Florence on the south side of the schoolhouse that afternoon, her sleeves rolled and a hammer balanced in her grip. She was driving nails into the window frame, her elbow braced steady, her braid tucked beneath a scarf to keep the dust out. A shallow cut marked her forearm, not fresh but not yet healed. You've been pushing too hard, he said, setting down the sack of iron hinges he'd brought from town. Children won't wait on tired bones, she replied, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. I want it ready before the frost presses in. You'll get it there, he said, but not if you splinter your hands before the first lesson. She stepped back, surveying her work. I never thought I'd build something with my own hands. Never thought I'd be allowed to. You're not being allowed, Rowan said. You're doing it. She turned toward him, caught off guard by the edge in his voice. His hat shadowed his face, but she could still see how his jaw had tightened. He shifted, glancing toward the hills. When I was a boy, I watched my father tear apart every fence my mother ever mended. Said it weren't her place to fix what he hadn't asked her to. Florence leaned against the wall, her voice low. My husband wasn't cruel, but he believed some things were fixed in stone. Who held the reins? Who waited with folded hands? You ever miss him? Rowan asked. She didn't answer right away. Sometimes I miss the idea of him, what we were supposed to be, but the truth is, I feel more myself now than I did in all those years. He nodded, his hand resting lightly on the window ledge. That's something worth holding on to. She drew in a breath, then let it out slow. What about you? You speak of your father like he's still pacing the porch. You ever let go of all that? Most days, Rowan said, but some mornings I wake up and expect to hear boots on the floorboards. That kind of memory doesn't dull easy. Florence's gaze softened. You never talk about what you want, not just what you've lost. He looked at her then, direct. I want steadiness. Not quiet, not peace. I've had both and still felt hollow. I want what lasts when the wind cuts through. Florence stepped down from the ledge, the hammer still in her hand. You think I could be that? I think you already are, he said. She didn't respond, but her fingers brushed his sleeve as she passed him on the way to the well. He watched her go without moving. That evening, the table was set with cornbread and beans, and Ella had fallen asleep on the floor with an open reader still clutched in her hand. Florence tucked the girl into her cot, then joined Rowan on the porch where the lantern light pooled beneath the rafters. She carried 2 mugs of chicory, one for herself, one for him. He took it without a word. I've been thinking, she said, settling into the chair beside him. About leaving, he asked quietly. No, she said. About staying. He didn't speak, but his shoulders eased. I want to raise her here, Florence continued. With soil under her nails and the smell of clean air in her hair, I want her to remember more than hunger and fear. Rowan nodded. She'll have that here. Florence turned toward him. And what about me? You'll have company, he said, and purpose, and room to breathe. That a proposal? She asked, one brow slightly lifted. No, he said. That's a promise. A proposal would come with a ring and a question. She looked at him for a long moment. Then ask it. Rowan set his mug down and stood, slow and certain. Florence Langley, will you stay here with me not just as a teacher or a mother, but as a partner? Will you build something with me that doesn't blow away with the next hard wind? She stood too, her hands steady now. Yes, I will. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He rested his forehead to hers, his calloused fingers brushing the line of her spine, and she leaned into him like she already belonged there. Inside, the fire crackled low, and Ella turned in her sleep, sighing into her pillow. Outside, the stars blinked to life one by one, and the house stood solid in the dark. Not just a shelter, but the beginning of something lasting. The last of summer's gold had drained from the fields by the time the schoolhouse opened its doors. The roof was tarred and tight against the wind, the floorboards swept clean, and a row of benches built by Rowan's hand lined the back wall. Florence stood at the front, chalk in one hand. Ella seated primly in the first row beside a pair of ranch boys with sunburned cheeks and wide eyes. After the children filed out that afternoon, Florence locked the door and turned, her skirts catching in the breeze. Rowan waited beside the split rail fence, leaning against the post with his hat tilted back. He held a folded cloth bundle in one hand. She joined him, brushing a strand of loose hair from her temple. They listened better than I expected. They were watching how you moved, Rowan said. Children can tell when someone's worth their quiet. She rested her hand on the gate. They asked if I'd stay through winter. I didn't know how to answer. Did you want to? I did, she said softly. I do. Rowan held out the cloth bundle. Then this belongs to you. She unfolded it slowly. Inside was a narrow silver ring, simple and worn smooth. The metal caught the light in a soft gleam. I bought that in Santa Fe 6 years ago, he said. I never gave it to anyone. I guess I was waiting for a reason good enough. Florence rubbed her thumb over the edge. This isn't a thing to give lightly. I know, he said. But I'm not asking lightly. She looked up at him, her mouth parted slightly, breath caught somewhere between surprise and something deeper. You sure? Rowan nodded. I've seen you build more in 3 months than most do in a decade. I've watched you steady my house, my land, and my heart without even knowing it. Florence closed the cloth and held it to her chest. I don't want a wedding in town. I don't want anyone's eyes but yours and Ella's. Then we'll say our vows in the pasture, Rowan said. Just us and the cottonwoods. They married the following Sunday, beneath the tallest tree near the creek, where the soil was soft and the air held a hint of sage. Ella wore a crown of woven grass Rowan had helped her braid. Florence's dress was plain, same one she'd worn from Missouri, but she'd let down her hair and it shimmered like river silt in the sun. Rowan took her hands and spoke first. I promise to carry your burdens when they're too heavy and stand beside you when they're not. Florence's voice didn't tremble. And I promise to build with you not just walls, but a life. Ella placed the ring in Rowan's palm, and he slid it onto Florence's finger. It fit as if it had been waiting all this time. That night, after the sun had folded behind the hills, they lay together in the quiet house. The windows were open, and the warm breeze stirred the curtains. Florence rested her head on Rowan's chest, her fingers tracing the edge of his collarbone. You're warm, she whispered. So are you, he murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead. You always run warm. Florence smiled without opening her eyes. I want to plant a garden come spring. Tomatoes, maybe, beans, flowers too. Rowan wrapped his arm around her waist. We'll dig the beds together. I want her to grow up with soft things, not just survival. She will, he said. She already is. They didn't speak again that night, not with words. Their silence was full and unhurried, shaped by the sound of breath, and the slow settling of two lives entwining fully. The years passed, as they always do, measured not in grand events but in small, enduring moments. The schoolhouse filled steadily, not just with children but with stories of reading and discovery, of scraped knees and new friendships. Florence taught through harvests and snowfalls, her lessons woven with patience and grit. Ella grew tall and sure-footed, her laughter rising clear through the grasslands. She helped Rowan with the colts each spring and took to reading beneath the cottonwoods while her mother wrote out the next day's lessons. Rowan built a second room onto the house, not out of necessity but out of abundance. He filled it with shelves, Florence's books lining them, the spines worn from use. In the evenings they sat beside the hearth and read aloud, sometimes for Ella, sometimes just for each other. There were hardships, lean winters. A broken leg Rowan nursed through with Florence's steady hands. One hard season of drought, but they met each one together. Not once did Florence feel alone again. By the time 10 winters had passed, the ranch had grown modestly, the fence lines stretching farther, the schoolhouse now with a second room for older pupils. They never left the land. They never needed to. And through all that time, Rowan never took off the ring she'd given him in return, a thin brass band she'd hammered herself, the day after their vows. He wore it like a second skin, and each time she caught it glinting in the light, Florence smiled, her heart steady and full. Because they had built something lasting. Because love, once earned, had made a home and stayed.